Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, it's a big one. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Little Mix called LM5. So this is the fourth Little Mix album that I've covered on this channel. And by now, I think you all know the beats that I'm gonna hit. The girls, they can harmonize their asses off, they sound beautiful, and their writing's often punching above their weight class. But the group's pivots towards pop in recent years have been handicapped by slapdash production that doesn't always flatter them as much as they could, keeping them from making great albums despite really good songs. Most likely because of budget constraints, because they're a reality show girl group assembled by Syco Music and Simon Cowell. Like their peers in Fifth Harmony, they were a group assembled for pop disposability, and I'll admit I was waiting for the moment when they self-destructed just like Fifth Harmony did a year or so ago, and yet that hasn't happened, and for the life of me, I'm a little bit stunned that they have lasted with as much consistent quality as they have. Hell, not just lasted, but prospered in the mainstream, at least in the UK. They got their most flamboyant pop push on Get Weird that was all over the place, and then they nabbed their first #1 in the UK with Black Magic, which is a great song. They're saddled with the most slapdash collection of ideas and co-writers on Glory Days just a year later, and not only did that album get better with every single listen, they snagged a second #1 and a respectable number of solid hits even before UK radio began remixing them with everyone under the sun. Oh, and despite its terrible music video, Little Mix made Touch, which was one of the best pop songs of the decade, and also wound up becoming a top 5 hit in the UK. So let's make this abundantly clear. While Little Mix hasn't quite won the critical acclaim of a band like Girls Aloud, who had some great albums, their sheer amount of success and consistent quality despite everything put in their face, it deserves to have them in that conversation of the great girl groups. And the big surprise for me is that they haven't had their US crossover yet. Hell, they just released the fantastic New Jack Swing, a private show to US radio back in late 2016. They would have beaten Bruno Mars to the punch by a solid year, and that song was arguably even better. So now we're in 2018. Fifth Harmony's been knocked off the board entirely, and Syco's even out of the picture now. Unfortunately, they were involved in production of this album, but now Little Mix is on RCA, UK, and Columbia. I see good things going forward. Now, the marketing was priming the band for the US market with this album, and while I had high hopes for the girl group, especially given how many genres they managed to leap across and survive over the past 5 years, pop and R&B are in a very different position in 2018, especially in the mainstream, and I had genuine concerns whether or not this would be what they would need to break through, especially with even more producers and co-writers joining them. But there's no excuse for this not to be good, and I did still have high hopes, so what do we get from LM5? Well, I'll say this now. If Little Mix and their management were looking to get as far away from Syco Music as possible, LM5 might be the prime evidence as to why. Because if we're looking for a project that's damn near crippled by awful production direction, it'd be this one. And look, folks, I'm trying to shoot Little Mix as much bail as I can. As you guys know, I have been a fan for multiple albums. The tones of mainstream pop in 2018, they don't flatter them whatsoever, but Little Mix work with what they have, and they're only growing as songwriters. And the core strength of these women as singers and performers, it is still very much there, but it's hard not to look at the production and the songs that they're working with the sinking feeling that this might be an outright sabotage release leaving out of Syco, and I can only judge the end project as probably being one of their weakest to date. It's not a bad album, but it's certainly a compromised one, and it's hard to call it all that good. And to explain why that is, alright, let's go back to Glory Days, an album that was just as much of a mainstream pivot in picking up trap and tropical elements for that mainstream radio push. Yeah, the album flies off in a bunch of different directions, and the melodies could occasionally feel watery or desaturated, but it was a project that understood the greatest strength of Little Mix, and that was the vocal harmonies and 4 distinctive voices given room to breathe and belt. And keep in mind, 2016 was not a great year for mainstream pop production either, but one of the reasons the album works so damn well is that it never compromised their strengths. So fast forward to 2018, where if we get pop at all, it's oily, slapdash, and overlayered in the percussion, but restrained in the melody, and catering to voices that rely a lot more on texture than vocal tone. And not only is Little Mix not given a lot to work with in terms of melody, but they're also stuck trying to sell songs where the vocal pickups are too close, badly mixed, and coated in a thin film of autotune, none of which is flattering or needed for them. Hell, on my first half dozen dozen listens, I could draw some parallels to early 2000s pop production, where the divas struggled to make that R&B transition, but Little Mix can handle R&B, they've done it before. But what it's more reminiscent of are the increasingly ratchet and tossed off songs that Beyonce put out between her self-titled album and Lemonade, or maybe a few of the cuts from Everything Is Love this year. And make no mistake, I did not like the vast majority of those songs, but Beyonce's mezzo-soprano has enough in her lower register to sound imposing and control more of the vibe and mix. You need a very specific vocal timbre to pull that off, and Little Mix's often higher, clearer tones, they just rarely work in that range, even before the mic pickup caused them to peak at awkward volumes away from each other, and the auto-tune keeps trying to tug them into this warbling off-key, and that sounds even worse. And you know, if all four of them felt at least somewhat comfortable within this style, it would be one thing. But Little Mix has always been four women with similar but distinctive deliveries, and forcing them to conform to dense trap percussion, triplet flows, and a very different cadence shows how it just does not work for everyone. Perry has consistently been my favorite in terms of vocal timbre, but giving her the upstroked reggaeton hook of American Boy reveals how if she can't belt on the song, she doesn't quite have the same consciousness of groove as Jade or Jessie do, but both them have limitations too. Jessie has the higher register and flow, but when the grooves get a little bit more unstable or clunky like on Joan of Arc, she just can't lock in, and that's before a song like Wasabi drowns her out behind filters for no good reason. And while Jade probably has the most comfort with the groove and the pseudo-rap delivery, if she's forced more into her lower register, especially if there's auto-tune, it's not a tone that she can utilize all that well. I mean, it's strange to say this, but for as much as the producers seem to want to smother Leanne Smolder in auto-tune, she's probably the most flexible across these songs and fares the best, and even then, it's not really flattering for her. And what's all the more exasperating is that there's still traces of the pop and even rock elements that gave Glory Days so much of its power, but the producer only seems to have put them in begrudgingly, like the snarled bass line on Woman Like Me, the flip of Syco's thong song on Love a Girl Right that actually gives it a little bit more muscle, the bite of guitar in the pre-chorus of Wasabi, the lumbering wallop with the hook on More Than Words, and then the sultriness of Notice, which is probably one of the best songs here. But what I probably appreciated the most was Told You So, not just because of the writing, which we'll get to in a minute, but because it was the most stripped back, mostly acoustic, and gave the harmonies a little bit more room to actually breathe and play off each other. Why anybody thought that tacking on what sounds like a future ad-lib to Think About Us, which sounds like a 2016 Sia song, or songs like Joan of Arc and Strip, which sound barely finished, or the overmixed flat disaster of Motivate, why anybody thought that was a good idea that flattered Little Mix, I have no idea. But now we get to the content. And look, it's very easy to pick on cheap pop empowerment that talks about the flimsiest trappings of feminist subtext. I've certainly torn into plenty of pop acts for doing this. And if you're cringing through Joan of Arc or Woman Like Me, especially in the latter case where the song is filled with insecurity that the guy will actually be attracted to her in this lane, well, I can't blame you that much. I am a critic after all. And if you find the overmixed trap oiliness about the last thing from Sexy and that compromises songs like Wasabi and Motivate, oh, I can't really blame you for that either. But you know what? I'd be remiss to not call out what Little Mix does right. And there is some nuance if you look between the lines. Strip might be as blunt as all hell in its body positivity message, but I like how the overall message is sexual empowerment in confidence, even if it can feel thuddingly on the nose. And when Little Mix focuses on sticking together, from the kiss off of gossip mongers trying to drive them apart on Wasabi, to banding together to kick a cheating guy's ass on Love a Girl Right, to the night in Consoling a Friend on Told You So, where the group very pointedly avoids condescension for her bad decisions, which could have been a very easy exit. I respect that. And you know what? I'll say it. I like the sexual frustration that fuels Notice. They're horny and all the more exasperated that the guy isn't really noticing it. That's some actual tension there that's well executed, and it's a nice middle finger to those who want Little Mix to play down their sexuality, which is basically another way of telling Piers Morgan to ram his head further into his large intestine, and really, who could begrudge Little Mix of that at least? But at the end of the day, again, for as much slack as I want to cut Little Mix, this is absolutely a lesser project from them, and I don't want to say it maybe even one of their worst. But you know what? If you're looking for a group that's been set up to fail for the last 4 albums and has somehow pulled out victory after victory, stumbling in perhaps the least friendly year for pop this decade, that's not something I'm going to hold against them that hard. Especially as you can tell that Syco was pushing them hard out the door and didn't give this the refinement it needed. So while I am going to give this a strong 6 out of 10 and really just a recommendation for fans only here, I will say it's transitional. And I do think Little Mix will be a lot better off on their next album, or when the pop music climate gets a little bit better. But until then, yeah, LM5, it does feel a bit disposable, but it's not bad. Scraping by more on the group's natural talent than anything else around them, and that's still promising. So what happens next? I think that'll be more interesting. So stay tuned. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm a little bit amazed I had this much to talk about for this album, but hey, fans, look, I really wanted to like this too, so the poll's there for y'all to tell me how wrong I am. If you want to buy and stream the album, links are down there below, but guys, it's just not as good as the last few, and I think deep down we all know that. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support the channel, so I could have covered this a little bit earlier, link to my Patreon right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. If you want to see my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.
For you to take off.